WHS Codes of Practice: First Aid, Hazardous Substances, Manual Handling, Risk Management and Reporting, WHS Consultation, Work Environment, and Working with Electricity. Now, a code of practice provides guidance on how to practically achieve a specific element that is outlined by legislation, which in turn makes the element easy to understand and implement. These codes of practice may contain risk management and emergency procedures within their documentation in order to support workplaces. So, we're going to take a look at a few of these different elements that are outlined in WHS legislation and essentially the types of things they kind of target in as concise manner as I can within their documentation in order to aid workplaces with their implementation. So, firstly, we'll take a look at first aid. And the specific code of practice here is the code of practice for first aid in the workplace, which has been redesigned in 2020. So it relates to duties related to first aid, workplace first aid requirements. So what do workplaces specifically have to do in order to be compliant with first aid? It goes over first aid kits, facilities, and signage, and their use and their placement within the workplace so that people know how to identify and find where these things are when an emergency does occur. It also goes over information about first aiders themselves, what are their requirements and specific procedures they need to follow in order to be up to date and what to do when things happen. Okay, so that's a bit of a summary of that code of practice. The next code of practice we'll look at is the code of practice for managing risks and hazardous chemicals within the workplace. So relating to that of hazardous substances. Okay, so it goes over essentially what is a hazardous chemical, how to identify chemicals and what may make them hazardous. It talks about the use of safety data sheets for recording chemicals kept on site and documenting what happens if there is exposure to those chemicals, and labeling and storage requirements of chemicals that are hazardous in order to keep workers in environments safe from what potentially the chemicals can do to them. All right, so once again, documenting procedures on how to go about the management of hazardous substances within a workplace. In relation to manual handling, there is the code of practice for hazardous manual tasks. This goes over the classifications of different hazardous manual tasks. It talks about the design of the environment to support the actual management of hazardous materials and manage them within the environment. It details musculoskeletal disorder, MSD, as what can occur when you do not manage in relation to manual handling and how it can be harmful to people's bodies. And then it goes over how we can use procedures related to controlling weight, size, and the number of objects we're handling in our day-to-day tasks so that we can go about manual handling in a safer way. And then obviously when objects start getting too large and too heavy, the use of equipment to support the lifting of these materials to protect our bodies and allow for the actual equipment that we used to do the heavy lifting itself. Okay, the next one is WHS consultation. And as said before, this is kind of a big one raised with the Work Health and Safety Act 2011. So what we have here is the Code of Practice for Work Health and Safety Consultation, Cooperation and Coordination. And it goes over things such as who has specific duties in this area. It details the importance of sharing information and how this can be achieved. It provides opportunities for participation and how this can be achieved within a workplace. How can workplaces kind of open up communication and allow everyone to participate at this level? It details different types of consultation that can be used within the workplace and specifies what are the mandatory requirements that need to be within place so that everyone can communicate about safety in the workplace and have their voices heard. This even goes in further than how do you actually feed back to those workers when they have raised an issue and let them know that it's being attended to and hopefully eventually resolved in the long term. The next code of practice relates to working with electricity, and that's the code of practice for managing electrical risks within the workplace 2019. Okay, it relates to working with electricity, identifying electrical risks and unsafe equipment so that people can be aware that there are dangers associated with an environment or there are dangers associated with whatever equipment they are using. It goes over securing and the isolation of electricity so that we know that if there is an issue, where can we go to power off the electricity so that we can cut powers to prevent further danger from occurring, or to switch off power so that we can look at electrical, which is most equipment, electrically used equipment, And then after this is done, how to restore power to these environments once work has been done or an incident has been resolved. Next, we have the work environment itself, and that's the code of practice for managing the work environment and facilities. Okay, it goes over general safety duties, the entry and exit points within an environment. Obviously, we can't have them blocked off, and they must be easy to get out, especially if they're fire exits. It goes over elements such as lighting, temperature, ventilation, and housekeeping. Okay, so the general environment and how these factors can just protect us from long-term issues. Okay, these things aren't things that aren't going to get you straight away, but having poor lighting and environment can eventually strain your eyes. Okay, poor ventilation can lead to dust building up in people's lungs. Okay, so they can lead to long-term injury. Okay, not immediate injury. So we do have to attend to these areas. And then things related to facilities, as the name of the code of practice outlines, such as bathroom facilities, storage facilities, and eating facilities, as just general support and hygiene requirements for workers' safety. The final code of practice we'll look at is risk management and reporting. Okay, and obviously this relates to the risk management procedure. So it's the code of practice for how to manage health and safety risks. Okay, and so who has duties for managing health and safety risks within an environment? So the PCBU, the health and safety representative, and the workplace committee. They all have requirements, but then everyone has one too. All workers and people in the environment have it. And so it kind of breaks down what are the actual requirements for those different categories of people. It then goes over the risk management procedure that is built into some of these other codes of practices, as I spoke about at the beginning. Those four key areas of hazard identification, risk assessment, risk control, and the hierarchy of risk control as a part of it, and monitoring and reviewing these practices once we implement them as an ongoing strategy. It also goes on about documentational requirements for the management of risk so that people can refer to what procedures are in place, or when an inspector comes in, what do they want to see as a part of a risk management procedure. So I hope this video has given you an understanding of the importance of codes of practices, how they usually focus on a specific element that is declared in legislation and details different areas in order to help support people with implementing these elements within their workplaces. So as you can see here, a lot of them were updated in 2019, with the first aid one being updated in 2020, and that's also part of the ongoing strategy for supporting safe workplaces. These will get revised again in a few years' time, making this video outdated. So you might be watching this in a few years' time, and some of these will be outdated then. But that's how safety works. We've got to consistently be monitoring and reviewing what we're putting in place in order to create as safe work environments as possible.